It's evening here, so I'll wish you good evening. I'd like to share some of my stories while I'm alive. Uh, I would hope that these stories can help someone, and I want to tell about some of the roads I've been down and some of the things that I think I've learned as I've lived. So this really has to do with my struggle to become obedient to the Bible. And kind of in a nutshell, one of the things I've learned is that bringing about this change of following Jesus, it's not really the work of man. Somehow it's the work of God. And there's so much grace in it. And I hope this story illustrates some of the grace of how God works in a life to change it, with me as an example. The book of James says in chapter 1, verse 22, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he's heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. I want to share with you one story of me trying to do that. A little background. This happens, I was in the Navy. I had been to nuclear power school, which was the first school that I'd ever really done well in. It just clicked for me and seemed to come easily, and I did very well. And then I went to the next phase of my training, and I was the first one qualified on site, which was, for me, a remarkable achievement. And I'm assigned to my first naval vessel. It is the SSBN 608 Ethan Allen, a missile-carrying submarine. It's a nuke boat. And our mission was it carries missiles, and our mission was to go hide. And so it was really, compared to other duties, it was really easier than other duties because there were two crews, gold and blue. I was the blue crew, and so we were with the boat half the time. And when we were with the boat, we were away from family. The first month was a intensive maintenance period of about 30 days in Guam, and then we went out in the ocean and hid for about 60 days. Well, I've been assigned to the boat, and I'm such an arrogant young man that because I did so well in nuclear school, I just assumed I'm God's gift to nuclear power and somebody's going to have to put me in charge of something. So I show up to the boat, but at the same time, running in parallel, I'm trying to study the Bible, and I've found this passage in Colossians that I'm wrestling with. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it, not only when their eye is on you to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It's the Lord Christ you're serving. Anyone who does wrong will be paid for his wrong, and there is no favoritism. Okay, so I've been struggling with that about obedience. Peter says something pretty similar, and Peter says, now make sure that you don't just obey the masters that are good to you, but the ones that aren't too, because this is going to bring glory to God. Well, this is a foreign message to me. I think it's foreign to our culture, the notion that we should obey someone who is a jerk, not compassionate. Well, anyway, I show up to the boat, and among other things, I'm wrestling with this passage, and the guy in charge of my division he's a master chief, which is E9. And since then, I learned that's quite an achievement. There aren't very many E9s in the military, and it was Chief Pimentel. Panamanian. I may have exaggerated in my mind, but I can't imagine he was any taller than 5 feet. He may have been, it just didn't seem like he was. It seemed like he was a short man and a Panamanian. And I show up to the boat, and he looks at me and says, "You're going to clean the battery well until the battery ground is 2 meg." Now, really, the battery ground wasn't 2 meg when it was new. I learned that later. That wasn't going to happen. So what he meant was, you're going to clean the battery until I say stop. Well, the battery is an area maybe twice to 3 times the area of an average living room. And it's not as big on a nuke boat as it is on a diesel boat. It just needs to run when the reactor scrams, when the reactor shuts down for a little while normally. But there's maybe 1.5 feet between the top of the battery and the top of the compartment it's in. So to do anything with the battery, the person in there had to crawl around on their belly. And there's battery acid everywhere, and it ruins your clothes, and it stinks. And so into the battery well I go. And I'm cleaning the battery, and I'm wrestling with the Colossians passage. And my heart is so wrong. And I can see that. That's apparent, that my heart is all wrong. And my attitude toward Chief Pimentel is not a godly attitude at all. I think Chief Pimentel is an idiot, which was really an amazingly arrogant thing for an E4 thinking an E9 is an idiot, and it wasn't true, but it's what I thought. And so there I am. I don't know how long it went on. It seems like it went on for a couple of weeks. If I wasn't on watch, eating or sleeping, I was in the battery well, and I was cleaning the battery well. And God and I are doing this wrestling match, and it is so apparent to me that my heart is wrong, and that I've looked in the mirror, according to James, and walked away, but not been changed at all, because I was still a rebellious young man, an arrogant young man, especially in regards to Chief Pimentel. And so I began to pray in the battery well, and I began to pray for God to change my heart. And for a while, the prayer didn't seem to work. That I still resented Chief Pimentel, and I resented that he wasn't giving me much respect by consigning me to this work that someone far less capable than me could be doing. Well, maybe after a couple of weeks, an interesting thing happens. I'd say it like this. The glory of God came into the battery well. I don't know any other way to say it. It was like my heart was transformed. My resentment was replaced with joy. And I had a new attitude. I had a new attitude toward cleaning the battery, and I had a new attitude toward Chief Pimentel. And I loved Chief Pimentel. I respected him, and cleaning the battery was fine. And if the glory of God is going to be in the battery well, I wanted to be down there anyway, because there's no place like that. If anyone who's experienced the presence of God says, let's do that again, that's good. And so I'd been transformed down in the battery well. I come out of the battery well. I don't know how much time passes, and I sleep, and they go back on watch. And I'm normally on watch with Chief Pimentel. Now remember, we're on a submarine. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean somewhere. Our exact location is a top secret, and we weren't allowed even to make much noise so we don't give away our location. So I get back to the engine room where my watch standing was done, and Chief Pimentel is not there. And I ask, does anyone know where Chief Pimentel is? And I get these stares. It's like, have you been on Mars? How can you not know this? said, well, maybe I have been on Mars, but what happened? Well, while I was sleeping, evidently, Chief Pimentel had developed a life-threatening condition. I think it was a severely impacted tooth, and we had basically a corpsman that was trained to physician's assistant. He was highly trained, but he saw this was over his head, and that Chief Pimentel's life was at risk, and he was incapable of dealing with it. So during the night, the submarine I was on had compromised its mission, had surfaced in the middle of the Pacific Ocean somewhere. A helicopter met the boat, and when the boat surfaces, it rocks around like a hog. And how I slept through that, I have no idea, but I did. And a helicopter had met us in the night and medevaced Chief Pimentel off to somewhere. Now, this may seem like a coincidence. This was not a coincidence. And I remembered at that time, Chief Pimentel in an earlier conversation had told me, he told me something that I since learned was completely true. He said, I'm an E9 and I was given a C billet. E9s don't get C billets. I don't know why I've been given this billet, and I don't understand why I'm going out to sea. E9s don't go out to sea, at least not in the submarine service. Thought that was interesting. So I'm back taking the watch, and I realize Chief Pimentel is gone. And it's one of those aha moments when I see the grace of God. God loved me so much that I was so rebellious, and this was going to be a great handicap throughout my life if I didn't learn how to submit and yield and respect those who should be respected. And so he sent Chief Pimentel. It became so obvious to me the answer to Chief Pimentel's question. I know it sounds kind of self-centered to say this, but I think it was true. I think I know why that E9 got sent to sea. It was for me. It was God's grace. Chief Pimentel was God's gift to me. It was the grace of God. Through Chief Pimentel, I was able to have a soft heart and a heart of yieldedness and a heart of obedience, which is absolutely essential for anything I was going to do the rest of my life, especially in the kingdom of God. I never saw Chief Pimentel again in my life. I had hoped to see him. I wanted to apologize to him, not only for my arrogant attitude, but because I now believed I was the reason he had to go out to sea. I don't think the Navy knew that, but God knew that. And so that's my story, was that this thing about the transformed life, this principle that I mention a lot because it's so important to me, and that is the principle that no one will boast in his presence. Well, this is another thing to where whatever progress I've made in being able to yield to those that are in authority over me, I really can't take any credit for it at all. This was the work of God. I'm so glad that he did it, but I can't take any credit for it. And I can't boast about my yieldedness because in a way I didn't have that much to do with it, maybe nothing at all. This was the grace of God. This transformed life, for me, there's a whole lot more to it than reading the Bible, saying I should do this, and then going out and doing it. If I could do that, I'd have something to boast about before God. But no one boasts before God. It's not just me that can't do that. No one can do that. It's the work of the Spirit to change my heart, to change my mind, to change my attitude. And so that's my story. And since then, Chief Pimentel has been a memory that's kind of burned into my psyche. And that when I work for someone that I don't particularly respect, I remember Chief Pimentel and say, oh, Yeah, my job is to make Jesus look good. And how I make Jesus look good is by yielding. Now, this doesn't mean I'm not supposed to participate in decisions, and it doesn't mean if I believe we're doing the wrong thing, I shouldn't say it, but I should say it respectfully. And then if I'm overridden, let it go and do what I'm told. That's a very Christian thing to do, is to yield and to obey. And I'm not a master of it, but I'm sure better than I used to be. So that's a story that defines who I am, but I don't think I'm alone in that story. I think there are Christians all over the world with stories like that, that someone reads the Bible, they see their inadequacy, they seek God about it, and God brings about a set of circumstances to change the heart and to change the mind. And so now my picture of the battery well is all different. The battery well wasn't the place of menial labor. The battery place was my burning bush. The battery well was the place where God met me. And he replaced my resentment with a lovely sense of submission and glory. And I'll trade resentment for submission and glory any day of the week. So that's my story. Chief Pimentel and the battery well.